My name is Nelson Stewart. I am 34 years old, and I never intended to humiliate my sister Megan at her engagement party. For years, I had allowed her to believe I was just administrative staff at the courthouse. That night, she openly mocked my career in front of everyone, calling me a glorified paper pusher. Then her fiancé, Andrew, a hotshot lawyer, curiously asked about my exact role. I simply replied, "Stepmom." The entire room went silent. Her parents turned pale. Megan froze in disbelief. Before I share what happened when the room realized who I really was, let me know where you are watching from and hit subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing tall when people underestimate you. Growing up in San Francisco, as the firstborn child of Richard and Karen Stewart, created a specific path for my life before I even understood what that meant. My father, Richard, built his reputation as a respected corporate attorney at one of the city's oldest firms. My mother, Karen, taught high school English with the same precision and attention to detail that my father applied to his legal briefs. Then, 6 years after I was born, my sister Megan arrived, completing our family of 4 in our Victorian home in Pacific Heights. From early childhood, the differences between Megan and me were apparent. I gravitated toward quiet activities, building elaborate Lego structures alone in my room or reading books well beyond my grade level. My academic achievements came naturally, almost effortlessly, which only increased my father's expectations. Every A+ was met not with celebration, but with a solemn nod, as if to say, "This is simply what Stewarts do." By 3rd grade, dinner conversations included my father quizzing me on current events and debate topics, preparing me for a future he had already mapped out in the legal profession. Megan, by contrast, entered the world as a hurricane of energy and emotion. Where I was reserved, she was expressive. Where I followed rules, she questioned them. Her artistic talents manifested early, but in our household, these were considered pleasant hobbies rather than serious pursuits. I remember her vibrant drawings being praised, but then quickly followed by questions about her math scores. "Nelson was reading at a college level by your age," my father would say, not maliciously but matter-of-factly. These comparisons, constant and unrelenting, planted seeds of resentment that would grow between us over the years. The defining moment of our childhood relationship occurred when I was 12 and Megan was 6. I had spent weeks preparing for the regional science fair, constructing an elaborate project on sustainable energy that involved a miniature working windmill. The night before the competition, I found it destroyed in our garage, several key components snapped, and the display board covered in crayon markings. Megan sat nearby, defiant but with tears in her eyes. "I worked hard on my art project too, and nobody cares," she said when confronted. My parents grounded her, but I saw beyond her actions to the pain driving them. That night, while attempting to salvage my project, I made a decision that would shape our relationship for decades. I would never be the source of her insecurity again. I would dim my light to let hers shine. This pattern continued throughout our adolescence. I graduated valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to Stanford, and then proceeded to Harvard Law School. Each achievement was celebrated quietly, almost privately, as I minimized my successes around Megan. Meanwhile, she blazed her own trail through high school, becoming a debate team captain and eventually pursuing communications and public relations at USC. Our paths diverged further in adulthood. After law school, I clerked for a federal judge, then worked as an assistant prosecutor. All the while, I described my career progression to my family in the vaguest terms possible. "I work at the courthouse" became my standard response, allowing them to assume I held some mid-level administrative position. When pressed for details, I would redirect conversations or speak about procedural aspects of my job that sounded mundane. This deception was not without cost. I lived in a modest apartment despite being able to afford much more. I drove a practical sedan rather than the luxury vehicles my success could have purchased. I fabricated stories about difficult bosses and paperwork challenges to explain my occasional stress. There was also the matter of my personal life. 3 years ago, I had been engaged to Lisa, a brilliant public defender who understood my world completely. She supported my career, but couldn't understand why I hid it from my family. Our relationship crumbled under the weight of this secret, with Lisa ultimately deciding she couldn't marry someone living such a compartmentalized life. "You need to integrate who you are with who they think you are," she had said during our final conversation. "Otherwise, you will never be whole." I had nodded, understanding her logic, but unable to explain the complex dynamics that kept me tethered to this charade. How could I tell her that every time I considered revealing my true position, I remembered the broken windmill and my 6-year-old sister's tears? So I continued living my divided life, visiting my family for holidays and brief weekend trips, always carefully maintaining the illusion that I was just getting by in a respectable but unremarkable career. My mother occasionally expressed concern that I had not reached my potential, while my father made connections with judges he knew, offering to help advance my supposed administrative career. The irony was not lost on me. Meanwhile, Megan flourished in the PR world, handling campaigns for tech startups and fashion brands. She developed a larger-than-life personality and a circle of equally ambitious friends. During family gatherings, she dominated conversations with stories of celebrity clients and lavish industry events, while I listened quietly, genuinely happy for her success but increasingly isolated in my deception. "You should ask Nelson about filing systems," she once joked at Thanksgiving dinner. "He probably knows every paperclip in that courthouse." Everyone laughed, including me. It was easier that way. The truth of my career was dramatically different from the mundane picture I painted for my family. At 33, I had become one of the youngest federal judges ever appointed to the Northern District of California. My journey to the bench had been meteoric by any standard. After graduating at the top of my class from Harvard Law, I secured a coveted clerkship with Justice Elena Kagan on the Supreme Court, an opportunity that opened doors few young attorneys ever access. Following this, I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office, quickly establishing myself as a formidable prosecutor with an unparalleled work ethic and a nuanced understanding of constitutional law. My reputation grew after successfully prosecuting a series of complex white-collar cases that other attorneys had deemed too difficult to pursue. The Hammond Tech case became my signature achievement, where I methodically built a case against a Silicon Valley darling who had defrauded investors of millions. Despite facing a defense team stacked with legal stars, I presented such a meticulously constructed argument that the jury returned a guilty verdict after just 6 hours of deliberation. This case caught the attention of senior officials in the Department of Justice and eventually the White House. When a judicial vacancy opened in the Northern District, my name appeared on the shortlist despite my relatively young age. The nomination process was rigorous, with my entire career scrutinized for any potential controversies or conflicts. The Senate confirmation hearings tested both my legal knowledge and judicial temperament, but I navigated them successfully, earning bipartisan support uncommon in today's polarized environment. Taking the oath as a federal judge felt surreal. My chambers in the Philip Burton Federal Building offered sweeping views of San Francisco Bay, a stark contrast to the cramped administrative office my family imagined I occupied. My staff included 2 law clerks, brilliant recent graduates who helped research cases, and a judicial assistant who managed my docket with military precision. The mahogany bench where I presided bore the seal of the United States, a daily reminder of the tremendous responsibility I had accepted. Each morning, I donned the black robe with a sense of purpose and humility, knowing that my decisions would impact lives in profound ways. The challenges of being a young judge were substantial. Attorneys with decades more experience sometimes looked skeptically at me when entering my courtroom for the first time. I learned to command respect not through age or intimidation, but through unimpeachable preparation and fair rulings. I became known for asking incisive questions during arguments and for writing opinions that were both legally sound and accessible to non-lawyers. My most significant case as a judge came just 18 months into my tenure when I presided over United States v. TechFusion Corp., a landmark antitrust suit against a major technology company. The trial lasted 7 weeks, with daily media coverage and a courtroom consistently filled with spectators. My face appeared on legal news websites and occasionally mainstream publications, leading me to develop strategies to maintain my privacy outside the courthouse. This high-profile position created an increasingly elaborate web of deception in my personal life. When visiting my parents, I would carefully monitor local news to ensure my cases weren't being discussed. I scheduled family visits around my court calendar, claiming busy periods at work when major trials required my presence. I maintained a separate phone for work communications and never brought legal materials to family gatherings. My chambers became more of a home than my actual apartment. I often worked late into evenings, reviewing briefs and drafting opinions. My judicial assistant, Marjorie, a grandmotherly figure who had served the court for 30 years, became something of a confidant. "Your Honor," she said one evening, finding me still at my desk at 9:30, "I've worked for 6 judges, and none worked harder than you. But I wonder what drives you to these hours." I considered her question carefully. "I feel I have something to prove," I finally admitted. "To whom?" she asked simply. I had no answer that made sense, even to myself. The absurdity of my situation reached new heights when I was featured in the National Law Journal's 40 Under 40 list of influential legal professionals. The magazine requested a photo session in my chambers, which I reluctantly agreed to, with the stipulation that distribution would be limited to legal circles. After publication, I purchased several copies, then disposed of them before visiting my family that weekend. During these visits, I would listen as Meghan regaled the family with stories of her PR triumphs, dropping names of minor celebrities and describing lavish industry parties. My father would beam with pride, while my mother would squeeze my hand under the table, a gesture I interpreted as sympathy for my seemingly less glamorous career. "And what about you, Nelson?" my father would inevitably ask. "Any exciting developments at the courthouse?" "Just the usual," I would reply. "Files to organize, judges to support." There were close calls. Once, a lawyer who had appeared in my courtroom spotted me with my family at a restaurant. I introduced him vaguely as someone from work and quickly steered the conversation elsewhere before he could address me as "Your Honor" or discuss the case he had argued before me. Another time, my mother surprised me with a visit to see where I worked. I hastily arranged for her to tour the public areas of the courthouse, introduced her to a few administrative staff who understood my situation, and fabricated a story about my office being under renovation. The question that haunted me during sleepless nights was why I maintained this charade. The simplest answer was that it had begun as a small deception that grew too large to easily correct. How could I suddenly announce to my family that I had been lying for years about something so fundamental? The longer truth was more complicated and rooted in my relationship with Meghan. I had watched her fight for recognition and validation her entire life. I feared that revealing my success would reinforce her belief that she would always live in my shadow. So I continued my double life, gaining respect in legal circles while remaining the underachieving older brother to my family, a contradiction that became increasingly difficult to sustain as my profile in the legal community rose. The embossed invitation arrived on a Tuesday, its silver lettering announcing the engagement celebration of Meghan Stewart and Andrew Harrington at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. I traced my finger over the raised text, noting the formal language and the not-so-subtle mention that Andrew was a partner at Preston, Harrington and Webb, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had recently ruled on a motion in a case where his firm represented the defendant. The Fairmont was a predictable choice for Meghan, who had always been drawn to old-world elegance and status symbols. I had attended numerous judicial conferences and legal association dinners there, always careful to avoid being photographed for event coverage. Now I would return as simply Nelson, the underachieving brother of the bride-to-be. I debated declining the invitation. The charade had become increasingly exhausting, and I questioned how long I could maintain it, especially in a room likely to be filled with legal professionals who might recognize me. But family obligations won out, along with a genuine desire to support Meghan despite our complicated relationship. For a wedding gift, I selected an antique silver picture frame that had belonged to our grandmother, having it professionally restored and engraved with their initials. It wasn't as flashy as the expensive items surely populating their registry, but it carried family history and sentiment I hoped Meghan would appreciate. The evening of the engagement party arrived with unusual September warmth in San Francisco. I dressed carefully in a tailored charcoal suit that balanced quality with understatement, a strategic choice to look appropriate without drawing attention. The suit was custom made by the same tailor who created my judicial robes, though no one present would know this connection. Stepping into the Fairmont's grand lobby brought a flood of familiar sensations. The marble floors, ornate ceiling, and hushed atmosphere reminded me of countless legal functions I had attended there. A doorman directed me to the Venetian room, where Meghan's celebration was being held. I paused outside the entrance, mentally preparing myself to step back into my alternate identity. "Nelson, you made it," my mother's voice cut through my thoughts. She approached with arms outstretched, elegant in a navy blue dress. My father followed behind her, his posture as rigid and commanding as ever in his perfectly tailored suit. "We were beginning to wonder," my father said, checking his watch though I was precisely on time. "Traffic," I offered simply, accepting their embraces. "The place looks amazing." The Venetian room had been transformed with elaborate floral arrangements and twinkling lights that reflected off the crystal glassware. Approximately 60 guests mingled around high tables or lounged in velvet-upholstered chairs. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and uniformed staff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. "Meghan and Andrew spared no expense," my mother said, following my gaze around the room. "Andrew's parents contributed significantly, of course." "Of course," I echoed, spotting the Harringtons across the room. Gerald Harrington was a legal institution in San Francisco, having founded his firm 30 years ago. His wife Victoria came from old money and served on the boards of several cultural institutions. Their son had been born into a world of privilege and connections that had undoubtedly smoothed his path to partnership. As I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, I noticed a familiar face approaching. Judge William Thompson, a respected colleague from the Ninth Circuit, was making his way toward our group. My heart rate accelerated as I calculated the risk of exposure. "Richard Stewart," Judge Thompson said warmly, extending his hand to my father. "It has been too long. Victoria told me your daughter was marrying the Harrington boy, but I had no idea until I received the invitation." "Bill, good to see you," my father replied. "You remember my wife Karen, and this is our son, Nelson." Judge Thompson turned to me, and I saw the moment of recognition in his eyes, quickly masked by professional discretion. "Nelson, a pleasure to meet you. What do you do?" "I work at the federal courthouse," I said carefully. "Administrative staff." "Ah," he nodded, giving me a curious look. "Important work happens at every level there." "Nelson has always been our steady one," my mother added, patting my arm with a mixture of affection and something that felt uncomfortably like pity. Before the conversation could continue, a commotion at the entrance signaled Meghan's arrival with her fiancé. She was radiant in a fitted silver dress that caught the light as she moved, her dark hair styled in an elaborate updo that emphasized her delicate features. Andrew stood tall beside her, golden-haired and confident in a designer suit, his hand possessively at the small of her back. They made their entrance like visiting royalty, pausing to accept congratulations and admiration from each cluster of guests. I watched as they approached the Harringtons first, observed the formal kiss Victoria placed on Meghan's cheek, the firm handshake Gerald gave his son. They were accepting her into their dynasty, and Meghan's triumphant smile suggested this was exactly what she had always wanted. When they finally reached our family, Meghan embraced our parents enthusiastically before turning to me with a more measured greeting. "Nelson, you clean up nice for once," she said, her tone making the words more barbed than compliment. "Not stuck organizing file cabinets tonight." "Congratulations, Megan," I replied, ignoring the jab and kissing her cheek. "You look beautiful." "And Andrew, congratulations to you as well." I extended my hand to her fiancé. "Thank you for coming," Andrew said with practiced charm as we shook hands. "Megan tells me you work at the federal courthouse." "Interesting place. I argue cases there frequently." "Just administrative work," I said smoothly. "Nothing as exciting as what you do." "Someone has to keep the trains running," he replied with a chuckle that suggested he couldn't imagine anything more tedious. Megan looped her arm through his. "Andrew just won a major securities fraud case last month. $70 million settlement." "Impressive," I nodded, thinking of the similar case currently on my docket. "We should catch up sometime," Andrew suggested. "I know most of the judges there. Maybe I could put in a good word, help you move up from the administrative track." "That's very kind," I said, feeling a twisting sensation in my stomach at the layers of irony. "Speaking of judges," Megan interjected, "Andrew's firm just hired 3 former federal judges as partners. The kind of connections that matter in this town." She delivered this information with a pointed look, as if to emphasize the gulf between our respective worlds. "We should circulate," Andrew said, already looking past me to more important guests. "Dinner will be served soon, Nelson. You're at table 3 with Mom and Dad. We arranged some nice people for you to talk to." As they moved away, I caught sight of Megan's friends watching our interaction. Sarah, her college roommate, now a successful PR executive herself, whispered something to Rachel and Jason, prompting knowing smiles. They had been part of Megan's life for years and had absorbed her narrative about her underachieving brother. I made my way to the bar, needing a moment alone. The bartender served me a scotch without comment, his professional discretion a small mercy. As I sipped the drink, I surveyed the room, recognizing several attorneys who had argued cases in my courtroom. None had approached me yet, though I noticed a few curious glances. Table 3, as it turned out, included not only my parents, but also Judge Thompson and his wife, along with 2 couples I didn't recognize. As we took our seats for dinner, I realized Megan had strategically placed me among the older guests, away from the livelier tables where her friends and colleagues sat laughing and taking selfies. "So Nelson," Mrs. Thompson began kindly, "Bill mentioned you work at the courthouse. Do you enjoy it there?" I felt Judge Thompson watching me with undisguised curiosity as I navigated another round of half-truths about my career. The evening stretched before me, a minefield of potential exposures, and I wondered how I would make it through without my carefully constructed world collapsing around me. The first course had barely been cleared when my father rose from his seat, champagne flute in hand. The room quieted as he prepared to speak, his commanding presence drawing all eyes. My father had always been a skilled orator, a talent that had served him well in courtrooms and boardrooms throughout his career. "Friends, family, esteemed colleagues," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "Karen and I are delighted to welcome you as we celebrate the engagement of our daughter Megan to Andrew Harrington." He spoke warmly about Megan's accomplishments, detailing her academic achievements, her rapid rise in the competitive world of public relations, and the prestigious clients who sought her expertise. With each accolade, Megan beamed, basking in the approval she had always craved. Andrew stood beside her, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder, the picture of success and confidence. Then my father pivoted, turning slightly in my direction. "Of course, we are blessed with 2 children. Our son Nelson has always taken a different path. While Megan pursued the spotlight, Nelson chose a more stable route." I maintained my smile, though I felt it growing brittle around the edges. The contrast he drew was clear to everyone present, the subtle implication of disappointment evident in his tone. "Nelson has found his place at the federal courthouse," my father continued, "where he provides valuable administrative support to the judicial process. We are proud of his steady contribution." The words administrative support and steady contribution hung in the air, damning with faint praise. I noticed Andrew's parents exchange a glance that spoke volumes about their assessment of the elder Stewart child. My mother reached under the table to squeeze my hand, a gesture of comfort that somehow made the moment more painful. After my father concluded his toast, the event coordinator, a brisk woman named Allison, announced that friends and family would now offer brief remarks. Daniel, Megan's friend from college, who served as the evening's MC, approached the microphone with an exaggerated swagger. "Before we hear from the maid of honor and best man, I think it would be wonderful to hear from the brother of the bride," Daniel said, gesturing toward me. "Nelson, would you share a few words about your sister and her fiancé?" I had not prepared remarks, assuming I would be overlooked in the evening's proceedings. As I stood and made my way to the small podium, I felt eyes tracking my movement, curiosity about what the overlooked brother might say. Drawing on skills honed through years of addressing juries and later from the bench, I spoke without notes, focusing on childhood memories of Megan's determination and creativity. I shared a story about her defending a classmate from bullies in elementary school, illustrating her fierce loyalty. I spoke of her resilience and drive, qualities I genuinely admired. I concluded by welcoming Andrew to our family and expressing hope for their happiness together. As I returned to my seat, I noticed surprised expressions from several guests, perhaps impressed by the eloquence from someone they had dismissed as unremarkable. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, while my father nodded approvingly, seemingly pleased that I had not embarrassed the family. Any warmth generated by my speech quickly dissipated when Megan took the microphone. She started conventionally enough, thanking guests for attending and acknowledging both sets of parents. Then her tone shifted, taking on an edge I recognized from countless childhood confrontations. "I want to thank my brother Nelson for those kind words," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "He has always been good with words, though he typically reserves them for filing reports and organizing calendars." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the room. "Nelson and I took very different paths in life," she continued. "While I was pushing boundaries and taking risks to build my career, Nelson has always preferred the safe route. I suppose every family needs its steady, reliable member who keeps things balanced while others soar." I maintained a neutral expression, though each word landed like a physical blow. This was not mere sibling ribbing. This was a public diminishment of my worth, delivered with precise cruelty. When I told Nelson I was engaged to one of San Francisco's top attorneys, "Do you know what he said?" Megan asked the crowd. "He asked if Andrew might help him move up from sorting mail to something more challenging." This fabricated anecdote drew more laughter, including from Andrew, who seemed oblivious to the inappropriate nature of Megan's remarks. I had said nothing of the sort, but the fiction served her narrative of the underachieving brother. "In all seriousness," Megan continued, though her tone suggested otherwise, "while Andrew and I are handling multi-million-dollar accounts and high-profile cases, Nelson is content filing papers and typing reports for people like us. It takes all kinds to make the world go round, right?" She raised her glass. "To different paths and finding where you belong, even if that place is behind a desk organizing someone else's success." The toast was met with scattered applause and uncomfortable shifting. Judge Thompson was watching me intently, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing understanding. Andrew's colleagues from his law firm exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the display but unwilling to intervene. As Megan rejoined Andrew at the head table, accepting his kiss on the cheek, I excused myself and headed toward the terrace. I needed air and space to process the public humiliation. The cool evening breeze offered little relief from the burning sense of injustice and betrayal. I had diminished my achievements for years to protect Megan's ego, and this was my reward. To be openly mocked and belittled at what should have been a celebration of family connection. For the first time, I questioned whether my long-maintained deception had been an act of compassion or cowardice. From my position on the terrace, I could see through the windows as Megan continued to hold court, laughing with her friends. Sarah, Rachel, and Jason clustered around her, a occasionally glancing in my direction with barely concealed amusement. They had been audience to her diminishment of me for years, accepting without question the narrative of the successful sister and her mediocre brother. My parents remained at their table, my father deep in conversation with Gerald Harrington, my mother watching the door through which I had exited, concern evident in her expression. She made a move to rise, but my father placed a hand on her arm, keeping her seated. Even now, maintaining appearances took precedence over comfort. As I contemplated whether to simply leave the event altogether, the terrace door opened behind me. I expected my mother, finally breaking protocol, to check on her son. Instead, Andrew Harrington stepped out, 2 tumblers of scotch in hand. Andrew approached cautiously, extending one of the glasses toward me. "Thought you might need this," he said, his voice lacking the polished confidence it had carried earlier. I accepted the drink with a nod of thanks, surprised by the gesture. We stood in silence for a moment, looking out over the city lights. "I want to apologize for Megan's comments," he finally said. "That went beyond sibling teasing. It was inappropriate." "You don't need to apologize for her," I replied, taking a sip of the excellent scotch. "Megan and I have a complicated history." Andrew leaned against the terrace railing. Still, it made me uncomfortable. That's not how I was raised to treat family. I studied him more carefully, reassessing my initial impression of a privileged, arrogant attorney. Perhaps there was more substance to the man my sister had chosen. "Can I ask you something directly?" Andrew continued. "You said you work at the federal courthouse in an administrative capacity, but you carry yourself differently. Your speech in there was polished, articulate, like someone used to public speaking. And Judge Thompson seemed confused by your introduction." I considered my options carefully. The charade had grown exhausting, and something about this moment, the quiet terrace, the respectful inquiry from a man who would soon be family, seemed to invite honesty. "What exactly do you do at the courthouse, Nelson?" The question hung between us, simple yet laden with significance. In that moment, I made a decision that would irrevocably change my relationship with my family. "I am a judge," I said simply. Andrew's reaction was immediate and physical. He froze mid-sip, his glass suspended halfway to his lips. His eyes widened, and I could almost see his mind racing, connecting dots and reassessing interactions. "A federal judge in the Northern District?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "Nelson Stewart," he said slowly, as if hearing the name for the first time. "Judge Nelson Stewart. You presided over the Tech Fusion antitrust case last year." "I did," I confirmed. Andrew set his glass down carefully on the stone railing. 2 months ago, I argued a motion before you in the Westland Securities case. I did not recognize you without the robe in this context." "Few people do," I acknowledged. "But why would you?" he began, then stopped, realization dawning. "Your sister has no idea, does she?" "None of them do." "My parents know," I clarified. "They attended my investiture ceremony, but agreed to keep it private at my request. Megan never asked for details about my career, and I never volunteered them." Andrew ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, disrupting its perfection. "So when she makes these comments about you being administrative staff, she believes what I have allowed her to believe," I finished for him. "This is insane," Andrew muttered. "You are one of the most respected young judges on the bench. The Westland motion I argued in your courtroom, the ruling was brilliant, even though it went against my client. I read that opinion multiple times." His genuine admiration was evident and oddly affecting. For years, I had minimized my achievements around my family, particularly Megan. Hearing open recognition of my work from someone who had experienced it firsthand created a strange emotion I couldn't immediately identify. "I need to fix this," Andrew said suddenly, straightening his posture. "This can't continue. It's not right." Before I could respond, he had grabbed my elbow and was steering me back toward the party. His determination startled me, and I found myself following his lead, unsure of his intentions but curious about what would unfold. The dinner service had concluded, and guests were mingling again, clusters of conversation forming around the room. Megan stood with her friends, laughing at something Sarah had said. She spotted Andrew leading me back into the room, and her expression shifted to one of confusion. Andrew guided me directly to the center of the room, then gestured to Daniel, who still held the wireless microphone. "May I?" he asked, taking it without waiting for a response. "Everyone, if I could have your attention for a moment," Andrew called out, his trial attorney voice commanding immediate silence. "There has been a misunderstanding this evening that I feel compelled to address." Megan moved to his side, her expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance at this unplanned interruption. "Andrew, what are you doing?" she whispered loudly enough for those nearby to hear. Andrew ignored her, focusing instead on the gathered guests. "Many of you know me as a partner at Preston, Harrington, and Webb. What you may not know is that I regularly argue cases in federal court, including before Judge Nelson Stewart, who has earned a reputation for brilliant legal analysis and unimpeachable integrity on the bench." A murmur ran through the crowd. Several of Andrew's colleagues exchanged knowing glances, while others looked confused by this apparent non sequitur. "Nelson," Andrew said, turning to me, "would you please tell everyone your full title and position at the federal courthouse?" The room fell silent. I could feel every eye upon me, including Megan's, which had grown wide with confusion. My parents stood frozen, my father's expression unreadable, my mother's hand pressed to her mouth. The moment stretched, heavy with anticipation. I had maintained this deception for so long that speaking the truth aloud felt almost transgressive. But the time for half-truths had passed. "I am United States District Judge Nelson Stewart of the Northern District of California," I said, my judicial voice naturally emerging, clear and authoritative. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Gasps rippled through the room. Megan's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. My father gripped the back of a chair for support, while my mother closed her eyes briefly, as if in prayer. "That's not possible," Megan said, her voice unnaturally high. "Your administrative staff. You file papers and type reports. You've told us this for years." "I never actually said that," I corrected gently. "I said I worked at the courthouse. You assumed the rest." "But why would you lie?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Why would you pretend to be something less?" "I did not lie," I maintained. "I simply did not correct assumptions." Judge Thompson stepped forward, placing himself beside me in a gesture of professional solidarity. "I can confirm that Judge Stewart is one of the most respected jurists in our district. His ruling in the Tech Fusion case has been cited by the Supreme Court." Another man moved through the crowd, a senior partner from Andrew's firm, whom I recognized from arguments in my courtroom. "Judge Stewart ruled against our firm in the Westland case 3 months ago. His opinion was masterful, even though it cost our client millions." Megan's face had drained of color. She turned to our parents, seeking confirmation or denial. "Did you know?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. My mother nodded. "We were at his investiture. We promised to respect his privacy." "You knew he was a federal judge, and you let me believe he was nothing." Megan's voice cracked with emotion. "Not nothing, Megan," my father corrected. "We never said that. We simply honored his request." The room had grown painfully quiet, the guests witnessing a family drama none had expected. Andrew still stood beside me, his expression suggesting he had not anticipated quite this level of fallout from his revelation. "I think," he said carefully into the microphone, "we should all give the Stewart family some privacy to discuss this matter." He handed the microphone back to Daniel, who appeared thoroughly confused by the turn of events. As guests began awkwardly dispersing to the bar and terrace, creating distance from our family tableau, Megan remained rooted in place, tears now streaming down her face. The public humiliation she had inflicted on me had rebounded upon her tenfold, and despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy for her position. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, I suggested, gesturing toward a small anteroom off the main space. Megan nodded mutely, allowing Andrew to guide her toward the door. My parents followed, my father's face now set in grim lines, my mother dabbing at tears. As I moved to join them, Judge Thompson caught my arm. "I never understood why you kept this so quiet outside of professional circles," he said quietly. "But I suspect I am about to find out." I nodded, then squared my shoulders and followed my family, prepared at last to bridge the divide between my two carefully separated worlds. The anteroom provided a stark contrast to the opulent celebration space we had just left. A small conference table surrounded by 8 chairs occupied most of the room, with a sideboard holding water carafes and glasses along one wall. The neutral beige walls and sensible commercial carpet created an oddly appropriate setting for the confrontation to come, reminiscent of the mediation rooms where I had encouraged opposing parties to find common ground. Megan paced the perimeter of the room like a caged animal, her elegant heels clicking rhythmically on the hard floor beside the carpet. Andrew stood uncertainly near the door, clearly debating whether his presence was appropriate for this family discussion. My parents took seats at the table, my father maintaining his rigid posture, while my mother's hands fidgeted with a napkin she had unconsciously brought with her. "Would you like me to leave?" Andrew asked, directing the question primarily to Megan. Before she could respond, I answered, "I think you should stay. You are about to become family, and secrets have clearly done enough damage already." Megan stopped pacing and turned to face me, her mascara slightly smudged from tears, but her expression hardening into something more defensive. "Secrets. You want to talk about secrets. You have been lying to me for years, pretending to be something you're not, making me feel sorry for you." "I never asked for your pity," I said calmly. "I simply chose not to correct your assumptions." "That's semantics and you know it," she snapped. "A lie of omission is still a lie. You let me believe you were struggling while you were actually some kind of legal star." My father cleared his throat. "Megan, perhaps we should all take a moment to calm down and discuss this rationally." "Rationally," she repeated incredulously. My entire understanding of our family dynamic just exploded in front of all my friends and colleagues, and you want me to be rational? "Megan," Andrew interjected gently, "everyone out there is on your side. No one is judging you for not knowing." "But they are judging me for what I said," she countered, her voice breaking slightly. "For making fun of my brother's job, when apparently he outranks practically everyone at this party in the legal world. I looked like a fool." "And how do you think I felt," I asked quietly, "when you mocked me publicly for being administrative staff? When you belittled my career and my choices in front of your friends? Was that kind or necessary, regardless of what position I actually held?" Megan had the grace to look momentarily abashed before her defenses rose again. "That was different. It was just teasing." "It was cruel," my mother said unexpectedly, her voice soft but firm. "Even if Nelson had been administrative staff, the way you spoke about his work was unkind, Megan. We raised you better than that." A flash of hurt crossed Megan's face at our mother's rebuke. She turned back to me, redirecting her pain as anger. "Why, Nelson? Why would you hide something like this? Were you trying to make me look bad eventually? Was this some long con to humiliate me?" The accusation stung, especially given how carefully I had maintained the charade specifically to avoid overshadowing her. "That is exactly the opposite of my intention," I said. "I kept my position quiet because I did not want to create more competition between us. I didn't want you to feel like you were living in my shadow." "So this was what pity?" she demanded. Poor Megan, too fragile to handle her brother's success. "It wasn't pity," I insisted. "It was an attempt to preserve our relationship. From childhood, you felt compared to me, measured against my achievements. I saw what that did to you, how it made you feel inadequate when you shouldn't have." "Don't psychoanalyze me," she said sharply. You have no idea how I felt. I remember the science fair project, I said simply. Megan fell silent, the reference clearly striking home. My parents exchanged a glance, recognizing the significance of the incident. You were 6 years old, I continued. You destroyed my project the night before the competition because you said no one cared about your art the way they cared about my science. That moment stayed with me, Megan. I saw your pain, your frustration at feeling overlooked. That was 22 years ago, she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. Patterns established in childhood don't simply disappear, I said. I watched you fight for attention, for recognition. I saw how you viewed family dynamics as a zero-sum game, where my success somehow diminished yours. So I made a decision to step back, to let you shine without competition from me. That wasn't your decision to make, Megan said, but uncertainty had crept into her tone. You had no right to manage my feelings that way. Perhaps not, I acknowledged. But it came from a place of love, not manipulation. My father, who had remained uncharacteristically silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. I believe I bear some responsibility here, he said heavily. I created an environment of achievement and comparison that fostered this dynamic between you two. We all turned to look at him, surprised by this admission. Richard Stewart rarely acknowledged errors in judgment. From early on, I held Nelson to extremely high standards, he continued. When he met them effortlessly, I simply raised the bar rather than celebrating his accomplishments. Then when you came along, Megan, I applied the same expectations, creating an impossible standard based on your brother's unusual abilities. My mother reached for his hand, squeezing it supportively. We both did, she admitted. We thought we were motivating you both to excellence, but instead we created a rivalry that wasn't fair to either of you. Andrew, who had been listening intently, stepped further into the room. If I may, he said, looking at Megan for permission to continue. When she nodded reluctantly, he went on. I had no idea about any of this family history when I recognized Judge Stewart. I was simply shocked to realize the brilliant jurist I had argued before was my future brother-in-law. He turned to me. The Westland Securities case. You ruled against my client on the preliminary injunction. The opinion you wrote was the most thorough analysis of securities standing requirements I've ever read. I actually shared it with associates at the firm as an example of exceptional legal reasoning. Despite the tense situation, I felt a flicker of professional pride at his assessment. Thank you. It was a complex case with compelling arguments on both sides. The point is, Andrew continued, focusing on Megan, your brother is exceptionally good at what he does. But that doesn't diminish your accomplishments, which are significant in a completely different field. There's no comparison to be made because the paths are entirely different. Megan looked at him for a long moment, then back to me. You really became a judge to protect my feelings. That makes no sense, Nelson. I didn't become a judge to protect your feelings, I clarified. I pursued my career based on my own interests and abilities. The decision I made was not to broadcast my achievements within the family, to maintain a lower profile so that you wouldn't feel overshadowed. That's so patronizing, she said, but there was less heat in her words now. Did it ever occur to you that I might have been proud of you? That I might have wanted to celebrate your success? The question caught me off guard. In all my calculations about protecting Megan's feelings, I had never considered that possibility. Honestly, no. Based on our history, I assumed you would see my achievement as another way you were being unfavorably compared. Well, that shows how little you know me as an adult, Megan said, sinking into a chair for the first time since entering the room. Yes, I was an insecure child who resented your achievements. But I've grown up, Nelson. I've built my own career, my own identity. I'm secure enough to celebrate my brother being a federal judge, for God's sake. I've clearly misjudged the situation, I admitted. And for that, I am sorry. My mother looked between us, her expression hopeful. Perhaps this revelation, painful as it has been, gives you both an opportunity to relate to each other as the adults you are now, not the children you were. Andrew moved to stand behind Megan's chair, placing his hands supportively on her shoulders. For what it's worth, I think having a federal judge as a brother-in-law is pretty amazing. And frankly, from a professional standpoint, I have tremendous respect for your work, Judge Stewart. Even when you ruled against me. Nelson, I corrected. When we're not in court, I'm just Nelson. There's nothing just about you, Nelson, Megan said quietly. I see that now. And I owe you an apology for how I spoke about your work tonight. That was inexcusable, regardless of what position you actually held. Her acknowledgement surprised me, and I felt something tight within my chest begin to loosen. Thank you. That means a lot. So where do we go from here? My father asked practically. We have a room full of guests, wondering what family drama is unfolding. We go back out there together, Megan said decisively, standing up. I apologize publicly for my inappropriate comments. We present a united front as a family. And tomorrow, when the gossip has died down, Nelson and I have a much longer conversation about rebuilding our relationship on honest ground. She looked at me questioningly, and I nodded agreement. That sounds like an excellent plan, counselor, I said, allowing a small smile. Don't get too comfortable with me, Judge, she replied, but returned the smile tentatively. I'm still processing the fact that my brother could have me held in contempt of court. Only if you appear in my courtroom, I pointed out. God help the opposing counsel if that ever happens, Andrew muttered, earning a sharp look from Megan that transformed into reluctant amusement. As we prepared to return to the party, my mother stopped me with a hand on my arm. I'm proud of you, she said. Not just for your professional achievements, though those are remarkable, but for your compassion, misguided as it may have been. You tried to protect your sister, even at cost to yourself. That speaks to your character. Her words touched me deeply, more meaningful than any professional accolade I had received. Thank you, Mom. Together, our small family group moved toward the door, preparing to face the curious guests beyond. The path forward remained uncertain, the wounds of misunderstanding still fresh, but for the first time in years, I felt the possibility of authentic connection with my sister. 8 months later, I stood in a small antechamber of Grace Cathedral, adjusting my bow tie while Andrew paced nervously nearby. Through the door, we could hear the string quartet playing as guests were seated for Megan and Andrew's wedding ceremony. How are you feeling? I asked, watching him check his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Excited. Terrified. Impatient, he admitted with a laugh. Is it normal to feel like your heart might actually pound out of your chest? So I'm told, I replied, though I lack personal experience in the matter. Yet, Andrew added meaningfully, Sophia seems pretty special. I smiled at the mention of the woman I had been dating for the past 4 months, a pediatric surgeon I had met through a judicial charity event. It's still early, I said, though privately I acknowledged the relationship felt different from previous ones, built on complete honesty from the beginning. Our conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. My father entered, resplendent in his formal attire, looking both proud and slightly emotional. It's almost time, he said. Megan is ready. She looks beautiful. I have no doubts, Andrew replied. And more importantly, I know how lucky I am. My father nodded approval, then turned to me. Nelson, Megan is asking for you. She's in the bride's room down the hall. I raised an eyebrow in surprise, but nodded. I'll go right now. The months since the engagement party revelation had transformed my relationship with Megan in ways I could never have predicted. The initial shock and anger had given way to a series of honest, sometimes painful conversations about our shared history and misunderstandings. I found Megan alone in the bride's room, a vision in her elegant white gown, her dark hair styled with subtle white flowers. She turned as I entered, and I was struck by how much she had changed, not physically but in her demeanor. There was a groundedness to her now, a self-assurance that came from somewhere deeper than external validation. "You look stunning," I said sincerely. "Thanks," she replied with a smile. Not bad for the sister of a federal judge, right? The joke reflected how far we had come, her ability to reference the past deception with humor rather than hurt. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Dad said you wanted to see me." "Everything is perfect," she assured me. "I just wanted a moment with you before we go out there. And to give you something." She handed me a small wrapped package that had been sitting on a side table. "Open it," she encouraged. I carefully removed the wrapping to reveal a silver frame matching the antique one I had given her as an engagement present. Inside was a photograph I had never seen before of Megan and me as children, arms around each other, grinning widely at the camera. "Mom found it in an old album," Megan explained. "It was taken the summer before the science fair incident. Before competition and comparison complicated everything between us." I studied the image, moved by the innocent joy captured there. "We look happy." "We were," she agreed. "And I think we can be again, in a different way." The past 8 months have taught me that. Those 8 months had been transformative for our family. After the initial shock of the revelation at the engagement party, we had established a new pattern of honest communication. Weekly family dinners became a tradition, sometimes at my parents' home, sometimes at my previously unseen condo with its views of the bay, occasionally at Megan and Andrew's place. During those gatherings, we slowly rebuilt trust. My father made efforts to praise both of us equally for our distinct achievements. My mother shared stories of our childhood that highlighted moments of connection rather than competition. Andrew and I developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect, careful to keep professional boundaries clear for cases where he might appear in my courtroom. Most significantly, Megan and I established a new kind of sibling relationship. She visited my chambers, finally seeing the world I inhabited each day. I attended one of her major PR events, impressed by her poise and strategic thinking. We began to appreciate each other's strengths without feeling threatened by them. "I want to thank you," Megan said now, bringing me back to the present moment. "Not for hiding your success, which was misguided even if well-intentioned, but for giving me the chance to know the real you, finally. For your patience as I worked through my shock and anger. For your forgiveness of how I treated you at the engagement party." "There's nothing to forgive," I assured her. We were both operating from old wounds and misunderstandings. "Still, I behaved badly," she insisted. "And knowing what I know now about your position and reputation, I'm even more mortified by how I spoke about your work." "Ancient history," I said dismissively. "What matters is where we go from here." Megan nodded, blinking back tears that threatened her carefully applied makeup. "Where we go is down that aisle, with my big brother walking beside me since Dad is officiating." This had been their compromise when both Megan and Andrew wanted my father to perform the ceremony, given his status as a retired judge. I had been deeply touched when Megan asked if I would walk her down the aisle in his place. "I would be honored," I said, offering her my arm. "Ready to face the future, sis." "More than ready," she replied, taking my arm with a confident smile. As we walked down the cathedral aisle together, past friends and family who had witnessed both our lowest and highest moments, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The path to healing had not been easy or straightforward. There had been difficult conversations, tears, and moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. But there had also been breakthrough moments of genuine connection. I remembered particularly a dinner where Megan had asked about my most challenging case, and I had shared the genuine weight of making decisions that affected people's lives. She had listened with true empathy, offering insights from her own work that proved surprisingly relevant. I recalled the afternoon I had attended a presentation she gave to a major tech client, watching with genuine admiration as she commanded the room with confidence and strategic brilliance. We had begun to see each other clearly, perhaps for the first time since childhood. At the reception later that evening, as I prepared to deliver my toast as her brother and attendant, I looked around the room at the gathered guests. Judge Thompson was there with his wife, along with several of my judicial colleagues, who now openly interacted with me as peers rather than maintaining the fiction of my administrative position. Andrew's law partners mingled comfortably, the initial scandal of the engagement party revelation now transformed into an amusing anecdote rather than a source of ongoing tension. My parents sat at the head table, my father's arm around my mother's shoulders, both of them beaming with pride as they watched Meghan and Andrew's first dance. There was a peacefulness to them I had rarely seen, as if the resolution of the long-maintained deception had lifted a weight from all of us. When it came time for my toast, I spoke from the heart about new beginnings and second chances, about the courage it takes to be truly seen by those we love. I spoke about Meghan's resilience and determination, qualities that had served her well throughout her life and would continue to strengthen her marriage. Later, as the celebration continued around us, Meghan found me near the dessert table. "That was a perfect speech," she said. "Though I shouldn't be surprised, given that you literally make important pronouncements for a living." I laughed, appreciating her ability to reference my position naturally now. "Different audience, different stakes." "I don't know about that," she countered. "Family might be the highest stakes of all." Her observations struck me as profoundly true. For all my professional achievements, the most challenging and rewarding work of the past year had been rebuilding our family relationships on a foundation of truth and mutual respect. This healing journey had not been without pain. There had been moments of raw vulnerability as we confronted years of misunderstanding and hidden resentments. Yet through that process, I had discovered that being truly known, with all my strengths and flaws acknowledged, was far more fulfilling than any professional recognition. I had learned that my attempt to protect Meghan by diminishing my own light had ultimately served neither of us. True connection could only exist in the presence of authenticity and mutual respect. As I watched my sister dance with her new husband, radiantly happy and secure in her own identity, I recognized that being underestimated had indeed been a strange gift, though not in the way I had originally intended. It had eventually forced a confrontation and resolution that might otherwise have never occurred. The painful revelation at the engagement party had ultimately created space for genuine healing and growth for our entire family. In that light, I found myself grateful for Andrew's impulsive decision to expose my secret, setting in motion the collapse of pretenses that had kept us emotionally distant for so long. So what lessons have you taken from my story? Have you ever hidden parts of yourself to protect someone else's feelings? Have you experienced the freedom that comes with being fully known and accepted? I hope sharing my journey has given you something to consider in your own relationships. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about family dynamics and personal growth. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that authentic connections require authentic sharing of ourselves. Remember that sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most meaningful relationships. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.